Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I think people are still joining, so we might wait half a minute. And as you guys are joining, you can just say hi to us in the comments. You can say where you're from, for example. That would be nice to see. And yeah, we're starting shortly. Great, sunny London. Yeah, I am based in sunny Oslo. Okay, I think we can start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, 5 Simple Steps to Zero Friction PCI DSS Compliance. This webinar is designed to provide guidance to companies who have payment pages on their websites and wish to accelerate compliance with the PCI DSS anti-skimming requirements 643 and 1161. Thank you for joining us today. Let me briefly introduce the speakers. I'm Katia, and I'm a product marketing manager at Jscrambler. My colleague Jeffrey is a pre-sales engineer and an expert on all things client side. We're going to be guiding you today through the 5 simple steps to zero friction compliance. A little bit about housekeeping. So this webinar will approximately take 60 minutes. You can use the chat window to ask questions and leave comments. We will have several polls throughout our discussion, so be ready to participate. And after the webinar, you'll get the recording of this session and additional resources on the topic from us as well. And, before we start, I'd like to briefly introduce Jscrambler. Jscrambler is a pioneering platform for client-side protection and compliance. We were founded in 2010 and developed extensive expertise focusing solely on client-side protection. We were the first to merge advanced polymorphic JavaScript obfuscation with fine-grained third-party tag protection in a unified client-side protection and compliance platform. And our 2 main products are Code Integrity, that offers obfuscation and runtime protection for first-party JavaScript, and Web Page Integrity, which offers fine-grained control over third-party JavaScript. And here's our agenda today. So we will start with the overview of the timeline and what to keep in mind when preparing for implementation. Then we'll cover briefly what changed in the requirements 643 and 1161 with 4.0.1 version. We will briefly talk about the existing solutions, their strengths and weaknesses. Jeffrey will touch upon the JavaScript attacks that basically are the reason for the requirement's existence and the importance of detection. Finally, we will share with you the 5 simple steps to zero friction compliance. Jeffrey will give a short demo of how we solve for the requirements, and we will conclude with some key takeaways. So let's start. So the reality today is that the deadline is approaching fast. It's 31st of March, 2025. When it comes to vendor evaluation and implementation, it's important to remember that processes such as proof of concept and procurement take time. So unlike some of the other processes that you see here, like vendor research and qualification, that can be expedited, those two cannot be easily rushed or skipped. So keep that in mind. Note that there is also a holiday code freeze at the end of the year that might prevent you from testing and deploying solutions. The timeline you see here is obviously like an ideal timeline with compliance ready status in September, October. But of course, it can and should be adjusted to your individual situation. So the advice here is to, like, when you can release the budget for a PCI DSS compliance solution, and it's not now, at least make sure you complete the proof of concept and procurement in advance. We recommend to schedule POCs early, as soon as possible, to avoid delays, because there will be a spike in activity before the implementation date, and therefore there might be limited availability. And another important point here to mention is you have to comply by March 31st, 2025, regardless of when your assessment happens. Because if you have a security incident between the effective date that is here in this timeline and your next assessment, you will still be liable, you will still be accountable. And the consequences can be vastly different depending on the severity of an incident and the amount of people affected. But it is wise to be compliant, and secure sooner than later than just to wait and hope for the best. Jeffrey, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of clarify on that last bit, right? I mean, the agreement that you make with your acquirer states that you'll be compliant at all times, right? And as soon as these come into effect, that's when you're expected to be compliant, not the next date of your next assessment or some later date. It's as soon as they come in. Of course, we all know they're recommended guidelines at the moment, but they will be mandatory on that 31st of March.
Yes, so that's exactly right. Thank you for clarifying, Jeffrey. Yes. So now Jeffrey will briefly remind us what the requirements 643 and 1161 are all about, and what changed in the latest 4.0.1 version.
And mostly what I want to focus on are the changes. I think we've covered the requirements themselves quite a few times, and I hope everybody's familiar with those at this point. But recently there was a revision, 4.0.1, that has some changes, but they're mostly clarifications. And I want to talk about what those clarifications are. You'll see I've got a couple sections here in bold that kind of highlight some of those clarifications. Of course, the full version of that standard's available through the council's website, but I wanted to pull out exactly what's changed. So here in the first part about maintaining an inventory of 643 with a business or technical justification as to why that's necessary. Originally, this stated as to why it is necessary to the payment transaction. I believe from talking to people through community meetings and otherwise that this was originally intended to get people to remove most, if not all, of the JavaScript that's on their payment pages, which of course would be the safest option. But of course, there's a business need for that JavaScript to be there, and that's why it stayed. That's why people are looking for solutions to better manage this type of problem. And so they felt it necessary to clarify, edit, change this particular requirement to say, hey, a business or technical justification as to why that's there. So this can be, hey, we use this for our user experience tracking. It only collects certain types of data, or technical justification like, well, this is a script issued by our payment provider, right? They need this script in order to function. So now allowing for both of those types of justification. The next point, talking about clarity around time. Previously, there was no real statement on whether you should approve a script change, approve it after the fact. And the reality is that you can't pre-approve all script changes. I'll have a diagram a little bit later that makes that a bit clearer, but most of the time you're locked into using the most up-to-date and public version of a script, right? You include a reference on your page that instructs your client, the purchaser, the customer, for their browser to grab the up-to-date version of that script. When that occurs, they get the live version, right? You can't possibly assess that before it is released, right? Your providers, whether those are tag managers, whether those are tags you're loading through those managers, your payment processor, all of those technologies want you to be on the latest version. And so this is just clarifying to say that, hey, if it can't be done beforehand, which is largely going to be the beforehand will largely be your first party code, you should do it as soon as possible after that. Now, what's as soon as possible? It'll probably be between you, your QSA, the acquirer, to define specifically for your purposes. The next section is really just a clarification around that these do apply to parent pages. So if you have a parent page with an embedded iframe, there is a little bit of confusion whether, okay, am I supposed to be protecting the content of the iframe, or am I supposed to be protecting the parent page that's hosting that iframe? This clarifies and says, hey, you, the merchant, are responsible for the parent page around that iframe and not the content within, which leads into the last point here that says, hey, as far as the content inside of the iframe, you should make sure that your payment processor is following the guidelines, following these themselves to make sure they have some kind of tamper control or monitoring within that iframe. So these last 2 points were kind of implied, but this stating them a lot more clearly. 11.6.1 has some similar changes. The first making it a tad more specific to say, hey, we're really only concerned about script content changes, not like an image changing on the page, not necessarily a DOM node or something like that, but script content on the page that could change, because that will be what affects the security of the cardholder data. And again, moving into the second point, restricting that to say, okay, only security impacting HTTP headers. If you're very familiar or you're a developer, you'll know that there are HTTP headers for a lot of different things, not just security, and this making sure that, hey, you really only need to monitor those specific headers, just narrowing the definition. And then the same clarification as in 6.4.3, hey, this is applicable to all parent pages, not just if you're doing SAQA, making it more clear what's going on. Just the parent page, not necessarily the iframe. And then, again, saying, hey, make sure that your payment processor, your PSP, is also following these requirements. Again, all of this is really focused on making it a little bit clearer, a little bit more focused on what is being asked here, making sure that you're addressing the issue that is brought about by having this type of script in the page. And that's going to kind of bring us into some of the existing solutions. From here, and existing solutions come in a couple different manners. Originally, 4.0 said something like CSP or SRI, which of course is a built-in capability of browsers, of web technologies, and so therefore is free. CSP, to make this very simplified, so apologies if there's any developers out there that give kind of a high level, CSP allows you to control where scripts are being loaded from. So things like URIs, URLs, specifically, you should grab these scripts from here. And SRI controls the specific version. When I say specific version, I do mean specific. SRI you use a hash to specify exactly what version of a script is expected to load. If it doesn't match that hash, SRI won't let it load. So CSP controls the origin of the script. And I load a script from this server, while SRI is controlling exactly what version from that server can be loaded. That will cover both of the requirements, save for the HTTP headers, which can be checked regularly. So that's the solution to both of these requirements. The next one is scanners, right? These are not the same as you may be familiar with like an ASV scan, which is really looking at internal servers. These scanners are performing what might be called in some cases a synthetic user session. So you could think of a bot where they go to the payment page, bring in a full version of the page, and might do everything but make a transaction. They'll retrieve all the scripts that want to load, they'll examine those scripts, they might make an inventory or trigger an authorization process, they might look for different changes. Good things about them, they are quicker to deploy. There's nothing to deploy typically. They may need training, certain ones, but they are a compliant solution. Load the page, take inventory, check out what's going on in the page, and report all of that back to some kind of central store or generate reports or something to that degree. And then the last section that I've got here that we'll discuss is agents. Agent-based solutions, again, not necessarily a piece of code being installed on the web server, but a piece of code that loads just like the other JavaScripts that we're concerned about monitoring. This allows that script to take a look at what all those other scripts are doing in a live user session. Some of them are capable of managing those other scripts. Generally are going to send telemetry somewhere to generate that inventory. And like I mentioned, some of them will be capable of blocking malicious behavior. Not necessarily all, but fairly common feature in the market. So not just talking about us here, but just general solutions. In general, these three solutions are going to kind of get you started down the path for compliance, but may or may not cover everything, right? CSP and SRI, for example, don't maintain an inventory. You'll need to do that manually. Some scanners may only generate reports, so you may have to examine the deltas between those reports in order to determine what you need to reapprove or what needs to be assessed. And similar for agents, right? They may or may not keep all that inventory in the system. They may run reports. They may other considerations to be had, but all three of these certainly can be tools used either separately in conjunction and will depend on your situation. And that's kind of what I want to cover next. What's the challenges that you may have with each solution? Where are they going to be better or worse? Because this is a decision you'll have to make for your own organization. CSP and SRI, you really need to use them in combination. As I mentioned, CSP controlling where you can load a script from, SRI controlling the exact version, which would be the monitoring for changes, monitoring for integrity changes component of 643 and 1161. These are going to be better when there are fewer scripts. In situations where there are many scripts, it's going to lead to both your CSP and SRI sections being quite long in the page and maybe hard to manage. There are some solutions out there that can automate this process, but that is kind of the limitations of those. SRI also fails silently, so if you have a conflict, if you load a script that you have not approved yet, that hasn't been through your process of updating that SRI hash, it will not be loaded, and it will also not generate an alert. This might not be a problem if it's something like marketing scripts or maybe some smaller libraries, but could cause large issues if it's something like your payment processor or otherwise, where you're just not loading a payment session anymore and don't know until your clients tell you so. Scanners, because it's a synthetic session and typically launched from one or a limited set of locations, they sometimes won't see everything. Not necessarily needing to get every single version of a script in order to be compliant. So it's not a compliance issue, but more of a security issue. There could be times where you miss things that maybe come about periodically, right? Per the standards, we're only asked to do this check once a week. But if you process tens of thousands of transactions in that time frame, that may or may not be frequent enough for you to consider this a secure method. They're also limited in that generally you can only detect, not block, unless they are linking into something like your CSP, where they can have some kind of effect on the page. If they notice something bad, well, it's a synthetic session. It's not real. So they can see how that attack occurs, but not really prevent it. That'll be something that you have to have a separate process for. And they can be less thorough just because you're not doing it as frequently, but you're also not watching a whole real transaction. You might be most of them going all the way up and to, but not including the actual checkout process. So you could miss some components once that process occurs. The last part being agents, where you add that script to the site. Could be a challenge if you have long change management processes, but that script being in the site allows you to take a look at every single user session, every time someone comes through the page. And this allows you to see that whole complete session and get a full readout of what's happening every time someone goes through checkout. And a lot of them are going to come with the capability to block or prevent the leak of certain types of data, which can be useful in remediation or investigation should you have some type of attack. Another consideration of agent-based solutions is what kind of infrastructure you may or may not need to run those solutions. Some are going to require a lot of infrastructure, some may require very little. It's another thing to consider as we get closer and closer on the timeline. If you purchase a solution that all of a sudden requires tons of infrastructure, might make the gap very, very narrow before you're able to get that into place.
Yeah, this is the time for us to have a little break and discuss the poll results. So you were asked the question, do you plan to hire staff to facilitate PCI DSS compliance or allocate staff specifically to PCI DSS efforts? And the results we have is 67% of you said, no, I'm planning to use current resources. 17% said, no, I plan to automate with a solution. And 8% said, the equal said, yes, I'm planning to hire someone new, just one person. And one person said, no, I want to outsource this. Jeffrey, do you think that's something we've heard before, that most people are planning to use current resources, team resources that they have for this?
Yeah, we've seen kind of a mixed bag. I think a lot of it depends on the maturity of the organization and how much they were previously offloading onto, say, a PSP or similar. Where if you're doing SAQA and you're doing everything through an iframe or you're something to that degree, trying to push as much as you can off onto the processor, you may not have all of that internal, right? You may rely on them to do everything and then use a GRC officer rather than like a dedicated PCI resource to accomplish this type of information, of this requirement. And then you may not have the information available as an organization to make decisions, right? Hey, if we see a script, if we get a report, we don't have developers in-house, or we don't have this type of knowledge internal, so we really need something to break it down for us or someone to handle that for us, right? So it depends on the maturity, I would say, but all of it we've heard before, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move forward. So when we're discussing existing solutions, and especially a CSP-SRI combination, it's important to consider associated costs and why you can dismiss potential financial consequences. So cost efficiency can be most easily achieved by automating script management and obviously saving team resources, because manual management of scripts turns out to be very time consuming and at the end of the day expensive. So on average, companies would have to spend $234,000 on full-time employees or employee maybe to manage scripts. Here, we took into consideration a number of apps that is 3 web apps. Of course, it differs from an organization to an organization, so it could be more, could be less, but on average, we're seeing that companies have at least 3 web apps with payment pages. And according to Jscrambler stats, there are around 30 third-party scripts per app and around 8,000 script changes per month, accumulating from 2,000 script changes per week. So automating these processes can save up to $250,000 in costs related to full-time script management and compliance. So direct consequences of a data breach have an average cost of $4.2 $1.45 million, according to IBM cost of a data breach report. Obviously, that's the worst that can happen, but there's also website downtime due to data breaches, or it's not. It may be an attack, so the attack doesn't always result in a data breach, but there might be disruptions due to attacks on payment pages or iframes, or simply, script-related mismanagement that results in the, let's say, payment button malfunctioning or the whole payment page going down. So all of that can cause severe financial implications, and lost revenue due to website downtime can vary from $145,000 to $450,000 per hour, depending on the company size and the number of customers affected. So it goes without saying that preventing interference with client-side JavaScript protects not just the revenue, but also the company's reputation, obviously. And in addition, the sooner you become PCI DSS compliant, you can save money by negotiating better rates on transition costs with Visa and MasterCard, reducing cybersecurity costs overall due to lower risks, and negotiating better rates on technology partnerships due to early adoption. To add to the point that I made before, that it's just easier to become compliant on time rather than waiting it out. So let's move forward to detection challenge, and Jeffrey will cover that.
Yeah, and what I've got here is kind of a simplified diagram around really two different ways that these types of attacks occur, right? One is more looking at kind of a first-party vulnerability, and one is third-party. So moving through the flow here, if you will, attackers really have two different ways to get malicious script into web pages, either via a third-party component, which is what's described here up on the top first, where they're looking at any of the third-party components that are in your site and adding additional code, misconfiguration, some change that allows them to affect what happens in the page. Something that's very different about JavaScript compared to other coding languages is that once a piece of JavaScript is loaded in the web page, it can do anything. It can handle any DOM node, any form. It can change an iframe. It can do any type of manipulation or change to the page. There's no concept of public or private variables or data that is protected versus not. So once that script is in there with that malicious component, it can replace the iframe. It can read the checkout forms. It can add additional behavior to things like submit buttons or pay now buttons that add in an extra piece of information that send that information back to the attacker, right? That kind of final step I've got there at the bottom. And so it's not necessary for someone to come in and get this code, get this vulnerability into your first-party code. Your first-party code absolutely is something that you should manage and take care of and make sure that it does not have vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in it, but you're also very concerned about what could come through that third party. This whole idea here, this JavaScript supply chain and the attacks that come through it, are the driving factors behind these two requirements, making sure that merchants are able and are monitoring changes that happen on their pages and changes that happen to third-party components that could affect their pages. And as an example, just on how many different scripts are in a lot of pages, right? You go, oh, well, it must be easy to manage if there's not that many. I've got here Walmart.com's CSP, right? So this is a high level of all the scripts that are allowed on their page. It's those of you familiar with wildcard notation will see all the asterisks in there saying, hey, anything from this domain. You'll see repeats, you'll see lots of different notations of the same information, and all this has to be maintained to enforce where these scripts are coming from. And this is only half, right, if you do choose the CSP SRI route. So I give this example one to show you just how many scripts are on a site, but also if you choose to go down that CSPSRI route, how many you're going to have to manage, right? And so each of these particular domains might load one or many scripts, and most of the time we find they do load many scripts. And so that presents a real challenge if you're hoping to do this manually. And so that's where I want to kind of go ahead and move towards our 5 simple steps for trying to get to version 4 compliance with these requirements in what we're calling a zero friction manner. Katia, I'll let you kind of start going through some of the challenges, and I'll.
Yeah, this is the 5-step program that we propose, and that is supposed to help merchants accelerate compliance. Yeah, as you can see here, it consists of 5 very simple steps: preparation, deployment, compliance, verification, and ongoing management. I will cover the first challenge that is behind the first step of the program, which is companies having lack of understanding of their current payment page status. And that happens because often the security and compliance teams have a lack of visibility into what third-party tags and services other teams are adding to the website, how frequently and where those third-party tags appear, and also how they access data. So this is an issue for a lot of companies, unfortunately. And the reality is that some of those third-party vendors have access to payment form data, and some of those third-party vendors can exfiltrate data to external domains. So this is the main challenge behind the first step, which is preparation.
And so what we're offering around preparation, we have a tool that's available that with your domain, we can go through to that payment page and generate a report that gives you an idea of, hey, how big is the problem, right? How much do I have? Generally, how much exfiltration do I already have? Is it something that is okay, right? That's something that I've put in there by design, and help you get a good idea of really the size of the problem. That's going to be a big driving force behind, hey, can I take a manual approach? Am I going to be okay with checking the page every so often, or am I going to need something more active? That'll help you start to scope out what kind of solution you want to choose. Again, this is something we offer for free. We'll send you a URL for this after the webinar. We only need the address of that page, and the report is yours to keep.
Yeah, let's move on to the next challenge and the second step. So the next challenge is concern over complex deployment and time to value. Some people worry about going through a lengthy evaluation process, but the reality is we outlined for you the available tools in the market, so there are not that many, so you don't have to really worry about that. And then the issue is allocating team resources for QA and deployment, which we'll also discuss that it's not really a big issue. And then finally, there may be lack of deployment options or having to commit to one deployment option early on. So that's why the second step is deployment, flexible deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we offer 2 different ways to deploy. What we found and sticking with that whole challenge, right, is finding resources to get things done. Some groups will have very lengthy change management processes or adoption processes that actually allow script to go into a payment page, right? We all have to keep in mind that this is the revenue generation for the organization, and we don't want to interfere with that. So there's typically a lot of security controls around those processes. So we offer 2 separate ways to get started with our solution. I'll get a little bit more into detail on this shortly. One is having that payment page URL set up in a way that we can monitor that page for changes, generate the inventory, and help you fulfill those compliance needs. And then the other option is to add that snippet to the payment page to load the agent code, just like any other third-party tag that you're adding to the site. We have customers that simply hard code it into the header of the page, but also customers that add it through things like tag managers or their CDN that allows them to inject it to pages as they're generated, or sometimes even dynamically, depending on what they have going on in their CDN configurations. So it gives you a quick way to get started, and there are options to move between the two methods, and as I'll show you here shortly, to use them together to get the maximum benefit for both compliance and security as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that in that case, when you opt for a flexible deployment, then you won't have switching costs either. You won't have to. It's not going to be expensive for you, because many people worry about that. And so, yeah, the next challenge is effective compliance with minimum maintenance. Obviously, everyone wants to be compliant smoothly without having to do much, and that's why there is this topic of manual versus automated solutions, and we already touched upon, CSPSRI, which is the most manual tool there is, and then there are some automated, semi-automated solutions and fully automated solutions. So this is something you have to think about. It's also important to have visibility into the client-side risks and be ready to prevent attacks. So that's why risk visualization is important, and compliance goes hand in hand with client-side security. And the whole compliance management process should be as simple as possible, considering the amount of scripts you might have on your website. So step number 3 is compliance.
Yeah, so moving into the solution itself. Our solution, whether you're using the agentless form or with the agent, both meet these requirements, of course, but fall more towards the automated side of where we're giving you a UI, where we're giving you an experience where you can go through and complete all the compliance tasks within the UI and receive a single report when it's time for you to show that to a QSA, or when it's time for you to take that report over to an acquirer or attach it to an SAQ or what have you, making sure that all of that is self-contained. So absolutely, in some of the models we do cover weekly or more frequently. In the agent-based model, it's continuous every single time that someone goes through a checkout solution. But then I've got some of these mapped to the requirements over there on the right, but I think it'll be better to just take you through the product and show you a short demo and how we meet these requirements. Before we do that, I want to talk about how we deploy, and that will take me over to what's called hybrid deployment for us, where we've got both solutions shown here, and certainly in the clients that go for the agentless monitoring can choose to include the agent and still receive the same dashboard experience, receive the same data. They don't need to migrate their instance or move services or anything to that nature. So just to go through this quite quickly, on top, I've got the agentless monitoring solution mapped out first, where we go through, we generate a session, go all the way up to before payment, and check out all the scripts that come in. We even take a fresh copy of those scripts and run them through a detection engine that examines them for malware, for known bad code. All of that is delivered back into the web page integrity services. Similarly, when the agent is included in the page, instead that agent code will load in a live session with your client, with your user, with the card information in their hand, and watch as they go through a checkout process. This is great because it's a real user session. It's continuous. Every time you have a checkout, you'll get a data point that shows that you have examined the inventory, that you've checked it for malicious behavior, you've monitored the integrity. And the agent, if necessary, can step in and configure that session or block certain aspects of scripts in order to keep that user secure and to prevent leaking information, certainly regarding to payments and other information that we're capable of monitoring. All those actions that agent does are reported back to web page integrity services where they're matched up to the agentless monitoring side. All of that, all the deltas, the changes are resolved for you and then shown inside the dashboard UI. Alerts are generated as necessary. And where I want to go next is over to the dashboard. The last note I want to make here is that there's no infrastructure to deploy. We don't require you to include us in any type of reverse proxy or other types of areas, hosting the agent code yourself or training the agentless monitoring. All that'll be handled by ourselves, CDN and database partners that we partner with to provide this type of protection. So let me change over here and I will pull up the console and we'll take a look at the experience as far as managing these two requirements. So as I mentioned, it is a wholly contained solution. As I'm pulling up here, we do whole screen. It is completely contained. Our PCI DSS solution resides in what we call our web page integrity product. We have a module in here that is provided for just the management of these two requirements. So you don't need to use the entire product in order to accomplish these two requirements. You need to purchase the entire product. Either you can get just this module for just your concerns around protecting payments. And what we offer in here is an inventory, first and foremost through this payment page manager screen. In here, we group that inventory by what we call vendor services. So I'll pick Google Tag Manager. As the name implies, it's got a vendor and a service that they're providing on the page, and then we make that up with any script that is detected that belongs to that vendor service. This is not something that you need to configure. It's automatically done by Web Page Integrity, where we sort these different scripts out in order to make sure that they're in the correct vendor service. From there, you can approve these vendor services by looking at the behaviors that they want to take on the page. So rather than hashing, we're using a behavior-based approach, and this helps keep the management aspect of things quite low, where we're managing them firstly as a group. So when I go through to take a look at Stripe here, I can take a look at the details and see where their script is coming from, where it's transferring data to in this case, where they want to load, say, the source domain for an iframe. Do they want to add an iframe to the page? And then what kind of data do they want to access when it exists in a form or exists directly on the page itself? This lets me see whether something is malicious or the legitimate version of a script that I intend to have on the page. And in this case, where it's legitimate, the authorized flow is wholly contained in here, where I can click authorize vendor, get a card where I record that necessity, that business purpose, the technical justification, and then allow or restrict this vendor's actions in the page. I'll allow Stripe, for example. When that's done, we'll mark them back as authorized, and we'll leave them there until their behavior changes in a way that could affect the payment information. So even if Stripe adds or removes scripts, if they generate script dynamically, this is a kind of a more common thing where we see we've worked with groups in the past that have even distributed thousands of versions of the same script. We're able to group them all together and say, hey, as long as all of you only want to do these particular behaviors, we can approve them all in one pass. We don't have to keep coming through here and clicking one by each every time a new version of that script's detected. When that does happen, though, when that change happens, right, we get away from what's acceptable behavior. We'll detect that, report that, and of course record it in a audit log where someone can come through, examine these behaviors again, and say, hey, I've got a domain in here that I don't really trust. I don't expect this particular group to generate an iframe or to access credit card data in a form, and they can come through and restrict this behavior as part of that authorized process. The authorizations process requirement 643 does not explicitly state that you should have these types of controls, but of course, if you've examined something and found it to be a problem, we've given you the tools to go ahead and mitigate this issue to protect the client while you figure out what's going on as part of other policies. So 12.10.6 comes to mind, which is covers incident response. We're giving you some of that incident response up front, where you can, of course, come through here and say, hey, yeah, I know that this is a bad script, or where we can set up guardrails for the either payment form or the iframe ahead of time so that you're in a default secure manner and stay compliant at the same time. The critical thing about all of this blocking, about all these restrictions that we can put in place with the agent-based model, is that they won't destroy the user session. CSP and others, even controlling scripts at a CDN level, can allow you to remove a script from a page, but that's kind of all that they can do. They can either include the script or they can remove it. We're capable of going through a site and blocking a script in a manner that allows us to not destroy the user's checkout experience, right? So when they come in to have the same checkout experience, even though I've just gone through and blocked large portions of a script, blocked large portions of what FullStory wants to do in the page, it doesn't destroy the checkout session for the user, allows them to continue forward and to complete a checkout just like they would expect. This version of FullStory, and the reason it had shown up as changed in the payment page manager, is because it has suffered a supply chain attack where someone's managed to get extra behaviors into that particular instance that would skim the card data. But because we've gone through that authorization process, because we have the agent in the page, we're able to hold off those types of access and preserve the order experience for the client, also not leaking their information. We've also not allowed that malicious code to execute. There's some guidance around the custom requirements that talk about what code you can and can't allow to execute. But moving from there, this is largely 643, right? So we've got the inventory, we've got our approvals, we've recorded why this is in the page, and we've set up for and responded to a change in integrity. The last piece, 1161, largely regards monitoring HTTP headers, which we'll cover first, and then driving alerts. In monitoring HTTP headers, we allow you to set a baseline for the headers that you expect to see and the values you expect to see for those headers that will allow you to get a good baseline to where you're not receiving tons of alerts all the time. So you can say, hey, this might be a header that I don't expect to receive, while this one is, or a value for that header. And once I hit save, we'll know that this particular value is accepted, it is a good known value, and won't generate an alert on it, even though we will record when we observe it. The other values, if they're observed, will generate a new alert to say, hey, we've observed a new header that you may want to review. All of that being driven and consolidated into this alerts view, and then further driven down to your SIM through webhook and other integrations that we have available to make sure that we keep the full process in line with your existing policies, and you're not having to assign someone to log into here every week or every month or what have you, keeping everything in line with what you have already. That's kind of a short demo. I just kind of wanted to get through and show the management console itself and drive that this is a wholly contained solution that we're trying to make sure you can cover all of the requirements within the dashboard, not have to keep separate paper inventories or processes outside of the product. But from there, I will pass back to you, Katia, where we can talk about.
Let's go. We have 2 steps left, so let's go to the challenge preceding the 4th step. So now you have the solution, right? But there comes compliance verification, and there are merchant challenges and QSA challenges. Merchant challenges might include no easy setup to have an overview of the vendor inventory, issues with reporting for QSAs to verify compliance, and ultimately time to verification. Delays in compliance verification can certainly be a big hurdle. So for QSAs, the challenges might include manual advisory and manual verification. Basically, the QSA has to match the provided vendor inventory with the reality. So they have to have some tools available, and they do not always have that. And yeah, it's essential for QSAs to do an accurate assessment, making sure merchants are supported in compliance verification. And so the fourth step is compliance verification. Jeffrey, you are muted.
Thank you. As I mentioned there, kind of towards the end of the demo, we do generate these reports for our merchants, right, that are using the solution. We can generate a report that shows, hey, here is when a particular person came through and made an approval, made changes to the particular vendors or headers, shows like full history, shows when it was detected versus when the alert was serviced, history of script changes, everything that a QSA is going to want to see when they go through to do that assessment. We've worked with different QSA firms and sent over versions of these reports to make sure that they actually match what they are looking to see. In addition, we also offer to QSAs a verification tool. So if you are a QSA and come across a page where someone's keeping a manual inventory or doing something like CSPSRI, or just don't have these types of reports available, we can generate one for you that you can use to check and make sure that the information you're being provided during the assessment matches the reality of what's going on the payment page.
Yes, so basically we cover both sides. We help merchants with compliance verification, and we developed a tool for QSAs to help them make the assessment faster and easier. And the last challenge is compliance maintenance and script authorizations. Basically, whenever there is a new script, it has to be authorized. You have to provide a written justification for each added script. Jeffrey covered that before. There's also a necessity to respond to alerts and do remediation. So step number 5 is, of course, ongoing management.
Yeah, and a lot of this is going to depend, so with our solution, a lot of this is going to be included, driven through the alert system. We have a service where we can also maintain those alerts and maintain those messages on behalf of the merchant, where we actually do the response, where we maintain the inventory, where we make sure that everything is staying within those compliance needs. But there are, of course, policies you'll have to consider no matter what solution you go with, right? How do scripts get onto your page, right? Are you going to assess before or after? Who owns what processes? If you detect an issue and you need to respond to that issue, right? You need somewhere to escalate that issue to. Do you have those people identified, right? Some of this is going to go under I mentioned 12.10.6 earlier, under instant response. Some of it's going to go under there, right? Where are the web devs or the tooling that I can get to remove a script from the page? A lot of this is going to be stuff that you'll need to have mapped out no matter what solution you go with. And so considering a lot of your long-term management is going to be very important, whether you go with an agent-based solution, a scanner, or whether you try and do it manually.
Yes, so these are the five steps. We have a little bit of time, so we will share with you some key takeaways. But now let's discuss a little bit the results of the second poll that we had. The question posed was, what are your top criteria in selecting a vendor? And the results I have is 50% said ease of use, 25% said cost is the top criteria, 25% said advanced security and control, and 0% chose minimum compliance checkbox. So I think this is very consistent with what we've heard before. I think a lot of people make an emphasis on ease of use. They don't want to spend too much time and resources on dealing with this. Is that right, Jeffrey? I think that's what we've heard consistently from.
Yeah, and a lot of it going back to Do you, as an organization, have the knowledge to go through and examine scripts, right, and understand what they're doing and why, and is this critical to their function, right? Do you have that type of information? If not, if you don't have that that level of understanding or maturity in that space, then you might look for something that, yeah, is a little bit easier to use, can break that down for you and make it more understandable. So,
Yeah. So in summary, if you follow those 5 steps we talked about, you can reduce a lot of costs and avoid certain risks while meeting compliance at an accelerated pace. So some of the things that are important to mention here is operating costs. Like we said, there are a lot of script changes per week, around 2,000 script changes on average, which accumulates to 8,000 per month. So this amounts to sizable management to do. And so you might have to hire someone, you might have to allocate current resources, but it will be costly for you. And there is a management challenge here, obviously. When it comes to risk mitigation, we have a stat here that according to MasterCard, digital skimming malware has cost over 1 billion in fraud over the past year by stealing customer payment data. And I'm sure you have heard of several big incidents recently, and something is always happening, so you have to be aware of the risks. So when you're compliant and you choose a secure compliance solution, you will be protected, and this risk is considerably mitigated. So that's something you have to consider. And then finally, something that is hard to quantify and hard to put a number to it, which is reputational risks, because whenever you have an incident that involves web scheming of payment data, your risks are very high. You have your relationships with your customers, relationships with your PSP, payment service provider, your other partners, and finally your card brand partner like Visa, MasterCard at stake. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. And of course, the reputational risks and financial consequences for each company will be different, but they are still very, very tangible. And so we're approaching the end of the session. So I will briefly talk about why choose Jscrambler for PCI DSS compliance. We are very active in the PCI DSS community. We are a principal participating organization, in addition to having our CTO, Pedro Fortuna, on the PCI SSC Board of Advisors. We work with the leading global QSAs, and we have a QSA Alliance program developed. You can go to our website and check it out. It's aimed to help QSAs get all the tools they need for compliance verification. And also, of course, we strive to educate as much as we can. And, we have over 10 years of JavaScript expertise and experience. We are the first to provide the client-side protection and compliance platform that covers both first-party and third-party JavaScript. So I know we're almost, out of time, but if you have questions, please post them in the chat and we will answer them. I think there was one question.
Maybe Katia too, you could talk about what else will be delivered, and then we'll cover other questions.
Yes, I can cover that. So after the webinar, we will send you an email with a recording of the session, and we will also include several useful PCI DSS related materials, such as a research paper, Comprehensive Approach to Payment Page Security and PCI DSS version 4 requirements 643 and 1161, authored by Coldfire. You will receive a buyer's guide to e-commerce security in PCI DSS version 4. And if you wish to get a free PCI DSS payment page analysis report from us that we mentioned in step 1, simply share the URL with us. You will see a little button in the email. You can just click it, go to the webpage, share your URL with us, and then we'll provide the report to you. And you can always,
Oh, go ahead. I was going to answer
No,
the
I was just
question.
going to say that, you can always reach out to us by email, or just go to our website, use the chat, or use the forms. And let's cover some of the questions that we have, Jeffrey, before we.
Yeah, I've got one here. I am glad that typically the one that I get here would be around iframes and stuff, but I think the clarifications to the requirements have perhaps saved that question. But yeah, the question I've got here is about how quickly would you be ready for an assessment after looking at a solution like ours. It's very determinant on your own policies and what you are intending to accomplish. If you're going for the agentless monitoring, you're looking at time frame of weeks from getting started with taking a look at a solution to having that in place. Probably would look at I would say 4 weeks to 10 weeks to get all the way from nothing to ready to go. It's going to be very, very dependent on your own policies around adopting solutions and how quickly you can do so. So I'd say that's the biggest thing to consider and take a look at. I think we talked about that on the timeline a lot, where making sure that your own internal policies won't stop you from being compliant on time, whether you go with a vendor or not. Right? Might not be able to do even manual processes without policy change. But yeah, like I say, the question I get here is normally around iframes, but been saved from that one this time.
Yeah. So
I think
if there are no more questions, I think we can thank everyone for joining today and spending this hour with us. We wish you a smooth PCI DSS journey. Expect that email from us. You'll get the recording and the resources. Stay in touch. You can subscribe to our newsletter, and you can follow us on LinkedIn. We post a lot of PCI DSS related content to help you comply in the most efficient manner.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.